she's like, you don't like the silence, do you? Like, the silence is uncomfortable. And it's like, Tarantino's trope of like, comfort is being able to accept the silence. And that's a part of like human nature and conversation. To break the silence, Zach, I suppose let's go ahead and do this thing.
All right.
So, by way of introducing this is episode 0 of the Rebel Tech Podcast. And, we now have, and you starting the Better Tech for Tomorrow campaign, me joining shortly thereafter, we've been in the throes, doing research, building up credibility, building our relationships with lawmakers and staff and folks all across the country. And we've spent an incredible amount of time just meticulously looking over the data and building up the credibility, subject matter expertise. In the last 6 months is when you and I, after having a successful first session in the 88th legislature, taken time to read more books, some of like the Neil Postman's, we were talking about the Musk biography by Isaacson that just came out. And now we're starting to get into the more, I don't want to say philosophical, but the 30-minute conversations that we have to start our mornings where, yes, we're a think tank. And we spend a lot of time discussing the more philosophical considerations. And so my way of saying, right, we now are at the point where there are a lot of conversations that we are credible spokespeople on. And I think more important than that, because we hear from so many folks who are on the front lines, we now are in a position where we can start to share this. And I love kind of as a jumping off point for you to talk through, our discussions about let's just do this dang podcast. Why are we, like everyone else, everyone's starting a podcast now? Why are we somehow credible enough to be doing this show?
Yeah, so one thing that would actually be really important for the viewer to know is that we actually only have one podcast at TPPF, and the only people that are ever on camera are the ladies from Sweet Tea. And so this podcast, every other podcast is actually just generative AI and deepfake.
This is true. So I don't think Josh Trevino is a real human being.
No, he's not. He's not real, and certainly Derek and Brian are most certainly not real. And so that's amazing how technology is that we can just, you and I are actually at our desks right now.
Are we? Is there a Turing test that we have to take to like establish this podcast?
That's true. So, but
what's your favorite color, the name of your first pet, and the last 4 digits of your social security number? Maybe that's the starting point.
And then generative AI explodes because it doesn't know how to answer those questions. But in all seriousness, and this is an area where you do have to take things very seriously, but you also have to add a little levity to the conversation, because it's too easy to get caught up in the the dystopian minutia of the day. And we've had amazing technological development, frankly, since the beginning of time with fire, and on our way now. But when you live in the moment, you sort of see this exponential, growth, and particularly today in our digital age, where it's ubiquitous. Digital technologies are ubiquitous. Nearly everybody in the world, some 5 or 6 billion people have access to smartphones and social media and the like. And so what I hope this podcast does is to take a step back and look at the impact, the positive and the negative impact of technology on life, on culture, and society. I think it's too easy in the think tank world to sit in our silos. In academia, pejoratively, we call them ivory towers. Life exists beyond white papers, and we do a very good job of writing white papers. I think our research is very solid, and we do a good job engaging legislators. But bigger picture is, legislators represent citizens. They represent constituents, and constituents are asking for meaningful legislation and protections against some of these technologies, which seem to be pushing, the let's say the cultural discomfort too far. So again, these conversations are so important to have, and I think we're not having the types of conversations that we need to have, maybe vocalized or amplified, the type of conversations that we want to have here about putting a movement conservative lens and perspective on technological and cultural issues. So we're not going to sit here and give boring recitations of Hayek and Friedman and Adam Smith and free market magic. We're going to look at, again, those impacts and how, as a matter of public policy, legislatures and legislators should respond to these issues and the cries and demands of their constituents.
Right. I mean, amen. See, this is where we could go for an hour. We're going to make this a shorter episode to kick things off, but I think you bring up a really good point, which is, what is the value that a group like TBPF provides in the tech policy discussion and discourse? And first is the research, which you hit on. And by way of our audience understanding too, Zach being policy director, we handpicked Zach out of the state senate in Iowa and wanted him to come down here to build out a brand new research initiative. And I won't forget, because I was chief of staff to Kevin Roberts at the time when we were building this out, there's a lot of questions on who should we bring and who's going to be the person that's at the tip of the spear of generating policy ideas. And you could go to your point, kind of the free market, token policy director position that maybe has experience working Section 230 issues or at the national level. No, we spent a lot of time thinking through, and I say we, it was largely Kevin and Greg Sindler, our now CEO. We want somebody who has an exciting outlook on tech policy, and Texas being the Lone Star state where we innovate. And of course, I'm almost facetiously wearing this shirt today, but we also have this rebellious mentality in Texas that we're not going to be like Silicon Valley. So we bring you over knowing you didn't have a deep understanding of the technology. You're not a technologist, you're not a coder, you're not a software engineer, but what you are is an idea generator, an issue spotter, and somebody who, as you mentioned, understands what is necessary to be effective in the legislature. And so by way of introing you to our audience, so to speak, that was what started our initiative in working on broadband, data privacy, kid safety, and so on, and to the point of anecdotes and not just being a think tank. When I think about tech policy and people ask me, what is it that you do for a living? As campaign director, I have the blessing of taking a lot of the good ideas that you and our policy scholar Grayson Gee and our team are working on, and I get to translate that research into action at the legislative level. I think of the hearing we had in Senate State Affairs in the 88th legislature on House Bill 1181. And for folks who are listening, who are part of the tech policy movement, you know about this hearing, but the high level is we had people, and we had you testifying, and we had folks who were speaking to the statistics and the data and the fact that the average age of viewing porn is now 12, and over 50% of young kids who see it are seeing it accidentally and unintentionally. And this is all by design. Tech companies know what they're doing. And you had a tech lobbyist who came up and said, they were there in opposition to a bill that would require age verification for pornographic content. And in that hearing, I feel like there was a degree of divinity at play, but also the realization of the anecdotal stories of folks like Deborah Berry, who were there testifying, talking about this is real. My daughter was preyed upon by these companies, these porn companies that know what they're doing, addicting children at a young age with the goal of stripping them of their humanity, of their innocence. And it was testimonies and stories like that. We had the research, we had the data that was all helpful and necessary. But to have those discussions where parents are like, yeah, that's happening. That's real, that's around. I don't know what to do. Yeah. Our polling says over 90% of parents in Texas feel there aren't enough tools to keep their kids safe. Yes. And so taking the time to, exactly as you said it, kind of jettison that ivory tower notion for just a minute and thinking about the impact this has. And when we were talking about this podcast, and I have a whole tagline prepared for it, but really what we're trying to do is have the discussions with lawmakers, with folks who are at the tip of the spear, either innovating or developing the next great companies, and discuss the innovation and emerging technology space as it relates to absolutely public policy first and foremost, but then the implications socially, economically, culturally, and I think almost succinctly and most simply, just the everyday interactions that we're having as Texans or Americans alike. So anyways, that is something we'll certainly hit on this podcast. I don't know if you have more you want to add on that point there.
No, I mean, I think you hit it so well, and that I think is also the great value that TPPF provides to this conversation. Is that again, we have the research, but it's all of those other methods by which we can get that information out there, and it's testimony, it's building coalitions and stakeholder groups, and it's products like this, communications products that help take very technically complex issues and make them understandable. And it's not just going to be you and I sitting here and blabbing on for an hour, though we do that anyways. Sure. We're just, putting a microphone in front of us, but trying to get other people in here who have that expertise, people in the policy world and people who have had those experiences to be able to bring it to the fore. There's a lot of issues, you talked about what we did, before those 3 issues: kids, online safety, data privacy, broadband. We're expanding out into the AI space, autonomous vehicles, the right to repair. The right to repair is a great example. You say, oh, we're doing right to repair, and people are like, what in the world is that? And you get out your cell phone and you say, should you be able to fix it? Should you be able to take it to, Joe's repair shop, or do you have to go to Apple? Do you have to go to John Deere? So these are the types of issues that a lot of times don't always, come to the fore, but that need to. So as we approach these things, as we were saying earlier, it's how do we take a meaningful look at the use of public policy to advance values like transparency and accountability and privacy and human dignity. And for too long, and this is not pejorative, to lobbyists or industries and that sort of thing. But we've been in stakeholder meetings with 50, 100, and even 200 stakeholders, and the takeaway from the lawmaker holding the stakeholder group is, don't just come to me and say don't do anything. Come to me with ideas, because the days of you coming and just trying to shut down things, that's not going to happen anymore. And it was probably exemplified no greater than during that hearing on HB 1181 in the Senate. And so we need stakeholders to come to the table with meaningful ideas, and they should, because if you're if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And for too long, companies like TikTok have tried to wiggle their way out of it, and we've hit a social, political, and cultural moment where, across the board, all ends of the political spectrum and everywhere in between, people are realizing the challenges that are presented by new and emerging technologies. And so we want to have bold, provocative, but meaningful conversations about how to address that with, again, the goal of those animating values, most of which, is consumer protection and human dignity.
Yep. Amen. It's funny, I'm on a tech policy podcast with you, looking at my phone, but we promised we'd keep this one short. So let's bring this to a conclusion here. This is episode 0. And the purpose of this, as identified by our far more intelligent chief communication officer, is set the tone. What is the expectation for all the folks listening? So we're the Rebel Tech Podcast, and we spent a lot of time thinking through this, and I want to tee something up for you. So, we look at this as if this is the digital frontier, right? And so it is an appeal to the 1836 ethos of Texas and the intrepidity and the entrepreneurship and all the values that animate why Texas is the greatest state in the union. And so we're going to have discussions with lawmakers. We're going to have discussions with folks who are on the front lines in the tech policy movement. What, for our listeners, and I know you said it's going to be just my mother to start with, and your wonderful wife, of course, as well. But as our audience grows, what is your goal? What do you want to leave? What is the legacy of this podcast for you that you'd like to leave behind?
Man, just, hopefully adding a needed voice to the conversation and maybe vocalizing the thoughts, the worries, the fears, and the hopes and the expectations of everyday Texans who don't work in the policy space, who don't work, don't work in the tech space, to bring to them an understanding of what issues are before us, to gain their perspective, and again, just add that voice that's so sorely missing on the center right about how to tackle these issues. And if we do that, then I think we've done a good service. Yeah,
amen. Well, to wrap this up, it's the last week of April right now, and on the horizon, we have the first AI Select Committee hearing, which will be happening at the very end of April. We have the Senate drop their interim charges, and artificial intelligence is a huge one in Senate B and C. We have deepfakes in criminal justice. We have more Gen AI in higher education. We have the AI Advisory Council, which Governor Abbott signed into law with House Bill 2060, where we're looking at state agency use of AI. And there's so much going on in the AI space. So for the audience that's listening, and for Zach and I, as we continue our great work and our campaign, we are now at a time in Texas. You talked about the cultural moment. The political moment is also here. So I know I'm excited to have all the guests we're going to have on. We can't say yet exactly who it's going to be. So be ready for folks listening. We got a lot of great folks lined up. But now is the point where we can start bringing, as we started this podcast, all the research, all the credibility that we have in this space, and really start kicking it to folks who are in the trenches working on these issues. So it's an exciting time for tech policy. With all that being said, this is the end of the first episode, episode 0. We've got so much exciting content on the horizon, so many great guests, so many discussions we're waiting to have. In the meantime, make sure if you're not following us, texaspolicy.com, check out all of our technology research we have there. We have videos, we have op-eds, we have research papers that are coming down the pipeline. I guess for now, we'll wait until we see you next time, and thanks for watching.